Hello and welcome to the Elevate Database Show, episode 23. Yay! Hi, everybody. We're here to explore current topics in data visualization and share our creative inspiration and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. Today, we're going to talk of all things Will Chase. Am I going the wrong way?
No, that's the right way, I think. It's hard to know.
So we're going to chat about switching careers into data journalism and what Will learned, and then also his most recent career pivot. And then we're going to talk lots more details about that. First, I'm Ali Torben. We have Duncan Gear, Gabrielle Marit, and of course, Will Chase spotlighted. And before we jump in, this show is supported by members of the Elevate Database Learning community who get the opportunity to watch and ask questions live. So if you would like to do that, and you want to level up your database skills in a very supportive community, you can check out elevatedatabase.com. Okay, so back to Spotlit Will. Can you take us back? I guess this was a few years ago, right? When you switched from, was it more of a financial position into data journalism a few years ago?
Well, yeah. First, should we get Will to just introduce himself to people who've got no idea who he is?
Oh, yes, just like a general, I'm Will Chase.
Yeah. Will 101.
Will 101. Yes, I am Will Chase. I've done many things. I've been a designer, a journalist, a developer, generally orbiting the world of data and storytelling and things for the web. I came from academia, like scientist, and then moved through various career stages. I've had a lot of different career pivots in my lifetime. In my relatively short career, I've had quite a few pivots. I currently am a product manager at Brilliant, which is a learning app that helps you to become a better problem solver, specifically around math and computer science and science topics. But prior to that, I was a data journalist at Axios, where I was leading our visual storytelling team.
Nice. Yes, it almost kind of feels full circle with the kind of coming back to like, not, you weren't teaching science stuff, but it's kind of like you kind of came back to the sciencey type.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's see. Your original question before I introduced myself was, how did I get into Axios? How did I get into data journalism? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, so at the time, this was, again, one of those kind of like career pivot moments. So I was working prior to that at Fidelity, also doing data visualization, mostly data visualization design, but very much for their like internal business intelligence stuff.
Can you for the not everybody knows who Fidelity is if they know.
Yes, Fidelity is a giant financial institution. So I think they're like probably like the largest financial institution in the world in terms of like how much money they manage. So investments, 401ks, all that stuff. So yeah, it was a lot of data. And so we did data analysis and visualization internally, like for people working in the company to better understand the customers and processes and stuff like that. So I got into that job basically because I was just interested in data visualization in general, and I got this great opportunity to work there. And it was great, and I learned a lot. But I think it was pretty clear to me, like from fairly early on, that like my real ultimate goal was more in the like public, like communicating data to the public, not doing it internally. And so I had my eyes on data journalism for a while. But I knew that it was like a big step because, it's a difficult field to break into, especially when you don't, like, it's one of those fields where a lot of it is sort of like pedigree. Like you generally like start out as an intern and then like move up to this. And then, and I didn't have that. And I didn't have any like official journalism experience to show for. But I always kind of had my eyes on that. So I was freelancing on the side and like developing those skills and sort of proving out my worth in that regard.
Yeah, you published something in Scientific American, right? You got something published there?
Correct. Yeah. So that's how I kind of like I knew I had these skills of the storytelling stuff, and I knew
Yeah.
that like I could do this thing, but it was really about proving that. So
Mhm.
when I was at Fidelity, I was still building a lot of skills like at the job, but I was also sort of like in my free time or at night, I was really focusing on like, let me just basically do the data journalism stuff like as personal projects on my own to like prove that I can do it.
Mhm.
And that's how I'll make this pivot into getting the job. And so um yeah, so then I applied like when the jobs came up and I felt like I had a strong enough case to make, I was applying for them. So I applied for a few different data journalism jobs, and Axios was the one that ended up being the right fit and working out. So that is how I ended up there.
Mhm. And can you talk a little bit about what you did while you were there? You were Was it like 3 years, 2 years?
It was like almost 4 years. It
Oh
was
my gosh.
I know, it was like time flies.
It does.
Yeah, it felt like it simultaneously felt like I just joined and that I'd been there 10 years.
I know.
You know,
I
it's
think
like
COVID did this all to us.
this
Mess up our
bizarre
brains.
dilation thing that makes no sense. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So yeah, I experienced a lot of different kind of like modes at Axios because when I joined, it was a very small team. It was just me and my boss, Danny, and then like 3 other people. So we were like a team of 5.
Mhm.
And then we shrunk a little bit to a team of 3 for a brief time. And then ballooned eventually when I left. I think it was a team like before that, it was a team of 12 at one point.
Mhm.
So when I joined initially, it was much more kind of like, um, we didn't have as much resources. So it was a lot of kind of like day to day work. Like we were getting chart requests from reporters and just making, charts as we could and like pursuing more kind of like ambitious projects wherever we had time. But yeah, it was a little bit more like the chart factory kind of setup.
Mhm.
But then as our resources grew, we had more opportunities. So eventually I did end up forming like a whole sub team that just focused on like longer form, like fully interactive articles and kind of special projects.
I definitely want to hear some more about the kind of like long form stuff shortly. But just before that, can you, for people who aren't necessarily so familiar with like the US news website landscape, like where does Axios fit into it all? Like
Yeah.
in terms of sort of size, in terms of subjects covered, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I would say we were like we were a probably medium-sized newsroom. So I think when I joined, it was maybe 300 people, and then eventually, by the time I left, it was closer to 500.
Hmm.
That's not all the newsroom. That a lot of there's people at the company that do all kinds of other things, the design and marketing and sales, and but it was a digital only publication, so there's no physical newspaper for Axios. And our focus was, in terms of subject, our focus was really like politics, business, and technology. But we also covered other areas. We covered climate and all kinds of things, general news as well. But that was our focus. And then in terms of like product, we had the website where we publish all of our stories like on the web. But we also were really heavily invested and focused on newsletters. So email newsletters was really like the core of our product, and that's sort of how it started. Was basically like a newsletter company. So that was an interesting constraint for like when we were designing charts and stuff. It was like it always has to work in a newsletter. Something you have to be able to put in the newsletter.
Does that mean that, because I know you did more of the long scroll later down the road, but
Yeah.
when you were, and there's still a section that was still producing a lot of charts every day to serve articles.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that you would have to like duplicate a chart, like make it in 2 formats so that it would web plus newsletter, or does that mean that whatever
Or
you
more
put
than
on
2
the
formats.
web it would work on both?
Yeah, we had our systems really well down. Like we had our systems set up very well so that like we made the chart once, basically, in most cases. And our infrastructure and our tooling would create all the different versions that would live for desktop web, mobile web, email newsletter, like all these different things. And so all of that happened automatically, basically. But yeah, in the case of like, there were obviously things that just don't work in newsletters, like a full long form interactive article. You can't just like embed that in a newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Despite being asked if you could do that many times, my answer was always no. So yeah, you know, in those cases, it's more like we would come up with like pull out maybe the most interesting chart or the most like intriguing chart that makes you want to click on it, or something that kind of summarizes the article, and then write like sort of a teaser basically, and encourage people like, hey, there's like a whole big interactive thing. Please click this link and go read it.
Can you? Okay, I don't know if I'm tracking this conversation, but maybe that's like me because I'm very interested. And we've had that conversation before, full transparency outside of the podcast. But
Yeah.
could you explain? Because when you're right, so my understanding of how the news work is sometimes you have to produce things really fast, like under really big time pressure. So that means you had to like create a system where you can produce chart fast. And I think that's very relevant outside of news. Like there's a lot of organizations that have to produce a lot of chart really fast. Could you just, and you don't have to go into too much detail, but explain, because I love, he did say that to me before I asked him. So I found it really interesting how you set up the system with the team, obviously, to produce those chart fast. So what tool did he use, and why, and what are different options? Because I think it'd be interesting people to know how this is done.
Yeah, definitely. It is a little complicated, so I'll try to give the short version, but stop me if I'm rambling. So this all developed over a period of time, but I'll talk about sort of like when we had it at the well-oiled machine stage. So we had an internal tool that we built ourselves called Hermes, which was a GUI, like a graphical interface for building charts. And this was pretty limited. So this was the tool that we gave to reporters because we get so many really, really simple requests that we're like, it's not worth our time to, and they don't need to like waste their time communicating back and forth to just make a line chart about a stock going up. So we had this tool called Hermes that reporters would mainly use to make like simple charts. And that was fairly constrained. Then most of our work, like when we got requests that were a little too complicated for Hermes or needed more of our eye on them, a lot of it was done with Data Wrapper. So Data Wrapper is a tool. Again, it's a graphical interface for building charts, but it's much more feature rich. And so we have a subscription, like they sell corporate subscriptions. And so we had one to Data Wrapper. So that's what we used for a lot of our charts. It's still a graphical interface, so it can't do everything. So when we got like a far more custom complicated request, then we would go into either Adobe Illustrator and, you know, essentially like drawing the chart by hand. Usually we're not drawing it from scratch. What we would do is like create a toy version or like a simple version in a tool like Data Wrapper or Raw Graphs or something, and then take that SVG into Illustrator and then edit it. And then we have a pipeline. There's a tool called AI to HTML that's a script that takes what you've done in Illustrator and basically creates a code version of it that you can embed on your website. And then finally, we would have, if it was like interactive and custom, or if you're just more comfortable with code, we would write code to make the charts. So we had a whole library of like code templates and components so that we could pretty quickly spin up a chart with code. And all of our coding, all of our charts was done with Svelte.
Can you talk a little bit about the process around once you changed to more long form stories? Like, were reporters coming to you with stories, or were you guys thinking of your own, or like how did that work?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. It was mostly us coming up with ideas and pitching them to the newsroom. we really tried to shift it the other way. Like we strongly encouraged, and there was desire both from like the leadership at the company and from us that like we want the newsroom more involved in the pitching process. We would love when people came to us with these ideas. But the truth is, it was really difficult to adjust like the mindset of reporters because a lot of them are just like not used to doing stories like this, so like they don't even know what's possible. We tried to do some education on that, but you know, it's difficult to get people to like kind of envision what could be or think of things in a different way. And then yeah, like they're so used to thinking of things in like a certain format that like, you know, a lot of times you just think of a story and your mind goes like straight to that. Like, oh, okay, here's the story, here's how I'll write it up for my newsletter. And that's not like a blame thing, because the other reason it's really hard is just because they're under so much pressure to like constantly be producing quick content. And so not low quality, but like, you know, fast paced content.
Yeah, newsworthy things that are
Right.
happening now.
Right. And so if you're like, I have to like every day I have to write, like I have to find and then research and then write like 3 new stories for my newsletter tomorrow.
Wow.
You know, a lot of times you just don't have time to be thinking
Yeah.
about like, oh, maybe I could do this wacky, crazy thing that'll like take tons of research and time to develop. And so it's like partially like a mindset thing and partially like just a resourcing problem.
How did you get buy-in from leadership to do those longer story then?
Well, initially we just, so when I joined, it was a little bit, because I think the company was smaller and it had started as like a startup, there was a little bit more of that startup culture and mentality. And so initially it was not hard because basically the mentality at the company was like, if you build some cool shit, we will publish it. Like if you just go off and do something on your own, and like whether it's a story that's like, you know, not something we'd normally do, or like a new format or whatever, like if it's cool and we think it's worthy of our readers' time, we'll get it out there. So that was basically what we did. We didn't really ask for permission. We just kind of like, we're like, hey, we have a cool idea. And then they were like, all right, if you make it and we like it, then we'll publish it. And so that's what happened. You know, that's glossing over a little bit of like rocky stuff. Like we obviously had to figure out how to actually get these things on the website. There was a lot of process involved that we had to figure out, and it didn't work perfectly in the beginning. But yeah, that was the first thing. And then we had a little bit of success with those. And then, you know, that kind of like got the ball rolling. And then over time, it sort of, the pendulum like shifted in the other direction, where it became harder and harder to get buy-in. And I think there were like a couple of reasons for that. One was, and they're related, right? So one was like, you know, the company grew, and so they started to like enforce more standards. Like we, you know, we need to be careful in how we're budgeting our time. And also some of that is coming from financial pressures, I think, which, you know, come and go. And so when there's more financial pressure, there's more like scrutiny on everything you're doing and how you're spending your time. And is this like a guaranteed win, or is it a big bet? And they're less willing to make big bets at that point. And like these types of stories are inherently bets. Like you can never say for any story you write whether it's going to be a hit. You know, it's like something going viral. Like it doesn't matter if it follows the exact pattern and like of some other thing that's gone viral, and you're like, oh, this is totally the kind of thing. Like you can never predict that. Sometimes they flop, and sometimes the other things that you never expect just go viral. And so it's the same way with these big stories. And it doesn't matter if you're writing a story that took you like, you know, 4 hours to write. If it flops, then okay, too bad, but let's move on. We'll pick it up tomorrow. But when we're working on a story that takes like 3 months to produce, they're like, wait a minute, we just spent like 3 months and like all these people's time, and it was like so much work and coordination, and then it like just like didn't get a lot of views. Like it was never a question of the quality. Everybody was always like, oh, these are incredible, the quality is so great, they're winning awards, blah blah blah. But like at the end of the day, for like money and dollars and cents and metrics, what matters is like, is it getting page views?
It's really interesting to me that page views still seems to be the important metric, because I mean, I was doing online news journalism like 15 years ago, and everybody was obsessed with page views then, and there was a lot of chat then about how page views were a terrible way to measure like whether something was good on the internet or not. Like,
Mhm.
why do you think page views have persisted, and do you think they will continue to persist?
Yeah, I mean, I should mention it's not only page views, right, that's used. So, they're like our stories, any kind of story that takes a long time to produce, if you go like page views per minute invested, per time invested in the story, it will never ever stack up, like no matter how popular it was. Um, so that wasn't the only metric, but it was more like, is this story like a prominent thing? Like, is it getting out there? Is it creating buzz, creating conversation? And
Those kinds of things are measured in page views, are they not?
yeah, and like that's the thing essentially, because
And
like
social metrics, I suppose, but yeah.
like it doesn't matter, if like 10,000 people read your story and like you get a great, like I don't know, 10 of them send you an email, which is like a surprising thing to do. So that's actually a good ratio. If you get like 10 emails out of 10,000 people and they're like, wow, I loved this. It was so creative and incredible and it taught me so much.
Or I hated it, please die.
Or
Yeah.
I hated it,
One of
please
those.
die. I get a lot of those too. But like if you get that kind of response and you're like, look, people are really engaging, it's like, well, sure, but only among a small segment. Like it doesn't matter if people are engaging if it's not getting wide distribution and wide views. And so I think that's why page views matters. Like it's a flawed metric, but it's also the only metric we have. Like we don't have any other way of learning like how many people are reading our stories, and that is a thing that matters at the end of the day.
Also, I mean, and maybe I'm wrong, but news today have a hard time living on subscription, so they have ads,
Mhm.
and to make money,
Ads require
they-
page views.
yeah, ads require
Yeah.
favorite. So I think when you think about the business model, the quality matters less than the amount of just views, right? Eventually.
Clicks.
Yeah, and it's really a question. Like it's really a question of like, I think a lot of it is timeline and like how much cushion you have financially again, because it's like, when they were in a great spot financially and like everything was good, then it's like, yeah, we want to do things that are like, we understand these will not be like huge cash cows, but we want to do things that are going to like raise our image, that are going to like give us more prestige, that are going to
Brand building.
like right,
Mhm.
brand building. And then but like that kind of stuff gets quickly deprioritized when you're like, we need to make revenue this quarter, and like
Yeah.
you have all these very highly paid, I mean by the standards of news, not absolutely high paid, but like by the standards of journalism, you have all these highly paid people working on this project, and so it's like we just can't afford to support this like kind of nice to have stuff anymore.
When you were creating long form content, about how many articles do you think you published, I don't know, per month or per quarter? What was the
Yeah,
throughput?
it averaged about like one per month.
Okay.
A little bit more than that, I think, like 1.2 per month at one point when we had like a full year of stuff going. And that's not like the only thing we were working on. We were still producing daily content. We were like, even the journalists that were working full time on the long form stuff, even myself, we were still doing break.
Oh, we are
Sorry.
losing Will.
I got a phone call.
Oh.
So I disappeared for a second.
You're back.
But yeah, we were still producing breaking news stories. We were still doing quick turnaround charts, working on tools for our own team, for the newsroom, all kinds of stuff. So we had a lot of different duties as well.
Mm-hmm.
And with the kind of like long form things, you said you were kind of approximately publishing one a month. How many would you be kind of working on at the same time? and how many kind of, I guess, like ended up? Oh, we've lost
Oh.
him. Yeah, must have got another phone
Now you
call.
can answer.
For those who are not watching the video, Will is on his phone because he had computer issues.
Yes, and he
Yeah.
just dropped off.
Switch it back to a slightly more equitable sized distribution of
This will
things.
be a good question when he comes back. Stefan asked,
Yeah.
question, what would the team working on a long-term project
Mm.
look like? How many people and what kind of roles? That's a good question because I think he did have a team of a couple people,
Yeah,
right?
Mm.
that's a very interesting question.
Oh, there's
But
one.
we'll wait.
Yes. He's
Okay.
back.
There he is.
Sorry, the phone call really threw me. My audio stopped working.
Okay. We just pulled up a question from Stefan, and he said, question, what would the team working on a long-term project look like? How many people and what kind of roles?
Yeah, great question. So the sort of team working on a long form project would be really collaborative, like cross functional throughout the newsroom. So it would usually include like one or two of our sort of full time interactives people, like people on my team. Somebody would be like project managing, like oftentimes that was me, kind of just coordinating everybody. And then we would frequently have like other people on the data viz or illustration team that were like either doing the main amount of work on the project or like contributing to it. So even though we had this little like focused team on these projects, it was like the whole data viz team of like 12 people. Like lots of them were the ones they would like pitch one of these long forms, and then maybe it would be like their main project for a while. So it wasn't just like, oh, these people, like this little team works on those and you guys do like the daily stuff. It was more like we just had more time to devote to that. So a lot of times it'd be one of us overseeing or maybe doing the engineering or something. So yeah, some number of people in that regard from our team. And it always changed. Like people have different roles. So, maybe on this project, I would be the designer. And on a different project, I would be the writer. And on a different project, I would be like the data person. And people held multiple hats frequently. So we all changed around all the time, depending on what like timing and expertise and interest we had for that story.
What made you want to switch to long form? Like, was there something that you didn't particularly like for doing day-to-day, like newsworthy type stuff that you felt more drawn to the long form?
I actually really did like the day-to-day stuff in a lot of ways. I mean, it's sort of like there's pros and cons, right? So the pros of day-to-day stuff is that like it actually is frequently interesting. Like you do get to do interesting stuff. And so, it's not like it's just line charts and bar charts all day. Like you get to make cool maps or like, oh, some fun Christmas tree chart. Like you get to do interesting stuff. The thing that's really great about like the dailies thing is that it makes you feel very accomplished because like you begin the day, you get requests, and then you tick them off and like complete them. So by the end of the day, you feel like, wow, I made like 4 charts today and like that was my task for the day and I completed all of them and I feel accomplished and I feel like I did my work and I can like turn off my computer and go enjoy my evening without feeling like I have all this stuff hanging over my head. The downside of it, the daily stuff, and the reason that like I didn't want to just keep doing that is just because it does get like monotonous in some ways after a while. You are like, even though you have these like pops of creativity and like areas where you can kind of like go out there and do a different thing, there's no like escaping the fact that you're going to be making like bar charts over and over again all the time. It's a lot of kind of rote repetitiveness. And also like, because a lot of the requests, most of the requests are coming from outside and are not like our ideas that we're generating, you don't feel always as involved in the process. And like that part of like, I came up with this idea is not as exercised. Um, and you do get to come up with ideas, and you do get to like be involved. Like journalists will come to you and you'll kind of like go in and brainstorm with them and be like, well, I don't know if this is the best way to show this. Here's how I would do it. Like, let me look at the data and I can give you some suggestions. But the sense of ownership wasn't always there. And so, yeah, I just wanted to do things that were more ambitious, like that I felt like I could be coming up with like new ideas, new formats for telling stories, like doing things that had never been done before in terms of like, I've never seen a chart like this, or I've never seen like a, you know, a story format in this way. And then also just being able to drive the topics that you're working on. Like, I want to do a story about representation in the Marvel universe. And that's not typically a request you're going to like get from the newsroom or something.
Or the size of truck beds.
Yeah, or the size of truck beds. And then it takes it takes time to like delve into that. So you need the space and time to really explore that fully.
So going back to my question a minute ago, just before you dropped out, like how many of those would you be juggling at the same time? Like ideas that you'd sort of be pursuing to a greater or lesser extent, and then how many of those kind of hit the skids and never ended up getting published? Like what kind of was your percentage success rate?
Well, I mean, we had a ton of stories that like never just were only ideas, and like we never really did any work on them, and they just fell by the wayside. Either because it was like, I mean, you know, it could be any number of reasons. Typically it was just like, this is not high impact enough that like we're going to get good buy-in, or we think it's worth our time. So you kind of have to choose the stories that you think are like the highest impact, the most interest to your readers. So it does make it tricky because a lot of like niche ideas are hard to bubble up in that way. Even though the niche ideas sometimes end up becoming like the most interesting and the most
and the most viral.
Yeah, so it's a really tricky balance to hit that and to figure out like, when is this a niche thing that is gonna be super interesting to other people, and when is this a niche thing that like only I care about? That's very difficult to do. But to answer your question of how many are we juggling at once, I would say like, I don't know, maybe 5 to 8 projects at a time. And like maybe
in production.
Well, so maybe 5 to 8 projects like in some phase of doing work. Maybe like half of those are just in the kind of like research or planning phase, and several of those will never make it to like the production phase. So yeah, like actually like doing design, coding, writing, really more like 2 to 3 at a time.
Because I feel like this is something that people don't necessarily appreciate about how much work gets done that never sees the light of day. So that's kind of why I wanted to ask you that question, because I think it is a really important thing, and people shouldn't feel bad if they are working on things and then they don't work out. Like it's not always like your fault. You know, sometimes it's just like it's not the right project and it doesn't work for another reason. It's not something you've done wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, there's a very, very long uphill work in these projects. You know, the research, the planning, the feasibility, the like outlining. And so typically like by the time you get to like, we have an outline, we know what we're going to do, we're ready to like sit down and make the thing, it's actually pretty fast. Like we can make something in the course of like 2 weeks if we really sit down and like sprint on it. It's all that uphill work that takes a long time, and that's where the project has a potential to drop off, because you realize like, this idea is just not panning out in the way I thought it would, or this is, you know, becoming something we don't want to do anymore.
This hill
or
is
just
too
other things
steep.
these other things take priority.
Yeah, totally.
Did you have a question, Gabby?
Yeah, I guess, you know, we had an episode on like a day of a database designer, and I'm curious to see, because we talk, so I'm curious to see like how did the fact that you became more of a manager and more working on longer story, where most of the work is just pitching and like the strategy of it rather than the actual work, how did that impact your daily like workload and life in general?
Yeah, This is a very, very good question, and hits close to home about, I think, some of the reasons why I'm no longer doing this. So I actually really enjoyed like managing. Like I enjoy mentoring people. I enjoy managing projects. I enjoy like, helping to make like sort of top level creative decisions and stuff. So in terms of how it impacted like my day to day, I mean, it was, pretty obvious. Like it's a lot more meetings. It's a lot more just like living in Notion or Google Docs and like planning and talking to people and communicating across departments, like checking up on schedules. It's so much admin work that you never see. Like you do not see the mountain of the other half of the iceberg that happens, which is just like coordinating with people to get a project out the door. Was like even if you have the whole thing made already, you have to coordinate with like the senior editorial staff to make sure they've gone over it, the copy editors, the tech department to make sure like the publishing and the website, like all that stuff is worked out, the social team to make sure like all the assets the audience team needs, they have. Like you have, it's just, there's many, many other functions that I'm also forgetting that we have to coordinate with. And so, yeah, a lot of my job was like that, basically.
Give us the percentage.
The percentage was like maybe 70-30. And then like 30% was like doing the work. And I think the problem was not that the 70% was that, because like I said, like a lot of it is admin stuff that like, sure, you don't like doing and whatever, it's hard. But like I did like the managing, being in charge part. So it wasn't like I hated that aspect of the job, even though it was annoying sometimes. But I think I found it really, really hard to do that job and continue to try to be creative and make work, because they're just such different modes of working. Like that side of the job, like the admin, the managing, all the stuff is like constant context switching. It's like fast things, you have like meetings all day and like little slots of half an hour here, half an hour there, where you can do like other work. And by the time you get to that other work, you're like exhausted because your brain has been doing all this admin stuff and like talking and task switching. And so, I would sit down and be like, oh shit, now I have to like come up with a design for this thing, and I have like no creative juices left, and I have like
and you have 30 minutes.
Yeah, I have 30 minutes and I'm tired and exhausted. And it made me kind of dislike that work. And that was part of why I was really like struggling, because I was like, even the parts that I think are like the most, I used to enjoy the most, like the creative stuff, the brainstorming, the coming up with ideas, the like sketching in Figma and stuff, like I was not enjoying that. I was actively disliking it. And so that was really kind of like a signal to me that like, this is not working well, like something's wrong here.
All right, we'll create some suspense. We'll get to your next pivot in just a second. We got a question from Gigi. They say, do you think self-initiated projects are the best way to strengthen your data viz portfolio when you're trying to make a career pivot?
I think they can be. I think if you have like outside opportunities that are coming in, so like if you're trying to make a career pivot into journalism, and like you happen to, through some like serendipitous arrangement, you get like, let's say a publication like Scientific American comes to you and says, I want you to make a data viz for us about this, then like that absolutely is like the best way to strengthen your portfolio, because you're getting to do the type of work you want, and it's like professionally backed, it's like stamp of approval from this thing.
And you're getting paid for it.
But I think if you're like more in that early phase where you haven't had a lot of experience yet, that's like honestly pretty unlikely to happen. Like, an unknown person is not typically going to get approached by like the industry they want to work in to just randomly do a thing. So yeah, in that phase, I think the best thing to do is self-initiated projects. Like if the outside inquiries that you're getting are like, not the type of work that you ultimately want to do, then they're not going to support you getting that job. Which is not to say don't do them. Like, you have to pay your bills and you have to, do whatever. But yeah, if you're trying to move into an industry, it's important to do that type of work. And so self-initiated is usually like the main option that exists.
The piece that you had published in Scientific American, that was a self-initiated project first, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. So that was a project where I was like, I'm just going to make this thing and publish it if nobody wants it. But like, I might as well pitch it like I've made it. And so I will just go to Scientific American and be like, hey, I made this cool project. Would you like to publish it? And they did. But if they had said no, I would have just said, okay, thank you, and then published it myself on my own website.
It's interesting that I feel like you've done it all, because you've done the self-initiated project that's on your website. There's a couple. You guys can go check it out. You've done the self-initiated pitch to journalists that got published once you had a little more. I guess they also knew you a little bit, probably. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said yes. On top of having it ready. And then you also, I think this is one that maybe was missed that you've done, which is self-initiate within an organization, because you were the one who decided you wanted the long scroll at Axios, and that wasn't standard. And I think that's something people forget, that like, I always tell them that like one of the option is try to do it within the organization, because then you're getting paid if you can get buy-in. But also sometimes you can do it like, we all know that most jobs, you have a little bit of leeway sometimes of things you could do, and like self-initiated things within the organization can really like get you somewhere, because also it's published, like Axios agreed, and let you do all those fun long story, because you could pitch to the business and make sense. I think that's also very valuable, that like, it's really interesting that you did all of those different approaches on self-initiated, but there's different versions. It doesn't have to be just like you in your corner on your own website.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gabby. By the way, I should just call out, guys, I do actually have a hard stop at 1 my time. So
Got it.
I have 10 minutes.
10 more minutes.
How dare you?
I'm gonna jump in there and ask a question that I'm really interested to know the answer to, which kind of relates to what we were just talking about self-directed projects. I know that you've done so one thing that we talk about a lot in the Elevate Data Viz community is creativity and art, and how you can bring that into your data visualization work. And I know that you've got a very strong background in doing generative art stuff. I've got one of your pieces on my wall. I can't show it on the camera because it's in the other room, but it's beautiful. And how do you think that that work that you did as a self-directed project has influenced your, I guess, like your career, I suppose, broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very influential in my career, but I didn't intend it to be that way. Like, that's an interesting one, because I started making the art stuff because I was like, I just want to learn more about this programming language, which was R. And I think art would be fun, like a fun and interesting way to do it. So I just started doing it with like no goals in mind other than making and sharing. And it ended up getting noticed. And then like that got me a lot of connections, like networking within the community. It got me like, besides all the learnings that I gathered, this is then just the external stuff that I got was like networking, which ended up resulting in like a talk at a big conference, and like other public appearances and talks and things, which ultimately, all of that, it's kind of, again, it's like that, the brand building, boosting your image, which just, you're a name in people's head then, or you have something like, oh, wow, this person has done this big thing and had all these appearances. And so, yeah, it was very influential.
All right, let's make sure we get to our big question. What happened? What happened to your data journalist career?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I've foreshadowed a little bit already that I was like not enjoying the work, let's say, as much as I should have, or as much as I did initially. A lot of that was also like constraint of resources, I would say. So, and doing the thing multiple times. So like, I think the thing that I found very interesting and challenging about like this long form work was that it has sort of like infinite possibilities to make new stuff and do new stuff. And you're always having to like reinvent a little bit and come up with a new idea or a new way to show things. But that started to happen less and less, because you are under resource constraints. So you don't have the resources to like reinvent the wheel every time. You can't spend 6 months or a year on every project coming up with like this insane, crazy way to show it. And so what happens is then you do like a dozen, 2 dozen of these projects, and they start to feel a little bit rote. You're like, all right, it's a cool story. We'll like come up with some design and then have like a header, and then we'll intro with like a little anecdote and then expand to this and then have like a database and then whatever. And, you know, kind of like you already like have it figured out in your head before you've done it. And so, yeah, I was basically just like, I'm not enjoying this as much as I used to. And so maybe I need a new challenge. So I had actually started looking for new jobs, like for, I don't know, like 6 months to a year, maybe. I had been like soft looking. So not like actively like, oh my God, I need to get out of here. Like I was still enjoying it well enough. I really loved my colleagues. My team was like the best people I've ever worked with. And so I was just like, when a really exciting, interesting opportunity would come up, I would apply for it. And then what happened was I had applied for one of those opportunities, which was the job I have now, which is at Brilliant. And it's a very different thing than I had ever done before. So I was like, this would be a very new challenge. And then as I had like the final interview for that, and then the next morning after that interview, I got the email that I had been laid off from Axios. And so, you know, the company, it's all publicized. You can go read about it. The company did pretty wide layoffs. They laid off like 10% of the overall staff. And on the DataViz team in particular, they cut half of the staff. So yeah, like 50%. And also for that's the whole visual. So also the illustration. So half of the entire visuals team got laid off. And yeah, I think it was very like, to me, it was very like a mutual parting, because I was like, I have been ready to go for a while. That was no secret to my boss. You know, we were all aware of kind of like the situation I was in. And so it felt like, fine, like this is the right time to leave. And then it all worked out. You know, I ended up getting this job offer and taking this other job. And so, yeah, it was like very kind of like a whoa, like roller coaster moment for a second, because I'm expecting to leave of my own accord, but then like the end result was all the same, I suppose.
Can you tell us in the 5 last minute, what is your new job and what do you do and why is it so different than data journalism? Because it's not data journalism, not per se, right?
Yeah.
So kind of curious to hear why you picked that direction.
No, it's not data journalism. It's not design. It's not data viz. It's not data anything. So it is a product manager at this, as I mentioned, learning company, Brilliant. The reason it has some connection to what I used to do is that they focus on interactive learning for the web. So the way that their lessons work is that they contain all these like interactive like diagrams and widgets and things that you can play with. So, you know, to learn how to do, like to learn physics, they have you like build a bridge and like see which connections you can delete. And then like if you delete the wrong one, like the bridge collapses. And so, you know, it's things like that. So it feels familiar, and like the way that the authoring works and all of that stuff, it does actually have a lot of connection to like what I used to do. What's different is that like I'm not the one designing those things or building them. I am the one managing those projects. So it's very much like when we talked about the parts of my job at Axios, it's like completely in the manager category. So my job is like prioritizing work, like making sure work is getting executed properly, giving feedback, QAing stuff, coming up with ideas, like where is our roadmap going to go in the future. The other reason it's different is because it's just a very different environment for me. So like I've worked in a lot of different environments, like academia, business, journalism. Now this is tech company environment. So, you know, it's very like we are operating like a software tech company. So yeah, that's a new environment for me.
Are you enjoying it so far?
I am. It's very challenging because it's so much to learn. You know, not only like the skills of a product manager, which, I mean, to be fair, like, again, I had some of that before. Like I was managing projects at Axios. So it's not like I'm new to the concept of how to manage a project. but there's a lot of things within the business context that are different, and I'm having to learn. And simultaneously, it's really difficult because the area that I work on is the learning formats, like our learning and authoring experience team. So it's like the core part of the product with all the content and everything. And basically, like, so I come in knowing nothing about the product, and your job, like a very important function of your job as a product manager, or like how you become effective at your job, is by knowing everything about the product. So I'm like, there's a gulf between what I need to know and what I currently know. So it's like trying to do the job and also learning like how to do like the title that I have, and also trying to learn everything about the company and the product that I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you're
But
going to miss DataViz
Um,
or need a break?
maybe someday. I think I have not closed out the idea. I foresee a future where I could like do a couple freelance projects on the side, or maybe just do it for fun at some yeah, or maybe go back into it. Who knows? I mean, I never know where the future will take me. I still love DataViz. I love storytelling. I won't stop liking those things. But I think I needed a break. And so currently I am not missing them, and I'm happy to be doing something different for a little while.
Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing all those details with us, Will. That was very, very generous of you to give us all those details. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thanks for your questions. And if you have any follow-up questions for Will, join our Elevate DataViz learning community at elevatedataviz.com. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.